Yeah, another big story here at home. People are reacting to a ruling that the Mount Soledad cross is unconstitutional. The judge claims the cross violates the separation of church and state. Some kind of cross has been on top of Mount Soledad since 1913, and the current cross has been there since 1953. It was built as a memorial to Korean War veterans. Well, after more than 20 years of legal battles, a federal judge has ruled that the cross violates the Constitution. Okay, so that's where we begin the debate, I suppose. And the topic is head of mind for a lot of people, especially for former Representative Duncan Hunter.
Yes,
Thank you for joining us. Appreciate your time.
That's right. With you. So, Congressman, first, before we get into any history in your involvement in the cross, because you were instrumental in transferring it to the federal government with the president, your reaction to this ruling from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals?
Well, I think this is another a typical nutty ruling from the most liberal court in the nation. You can always, the liberal mantra is you can always go to San Francisco and get a left-wing ruling which flies in the face of all normalcy. And the reason we put the memorial at Mount Soledad under the federal government is so it would have the protection of the U.S. Constitution. Now, this lady judge who ruled that it's unconstitutional has a lot of work ahead of her, because she's now going to have to tear the crosses off of hundreds of memorials, including those at Arlington Cemetery, if she's going to get her work done.
That is one of the ironies, is there are religious symbols all over federal property around this country, but they continue to go after this cross.
You know, they go after this cross, and you know what is to me is really the heart of this thing is there's a lot of people who are memorialized at that cross. You know, lots of plaques of veterans whose plaques were put there by their family members, by their loved ones, by their buddies in arms. A lot of those guys carried replicas of that cross around their necks at places like Iwo Jima and Normandy, and it's as much a part of their service to the nation as putting on their dog tags and putting on their uniforms, whether they served in the Navy, the Marines, the Army. And you know, this judge, you know, when we had the first Constitutional Convention and we put together the U.S. Constitution, if you read the history of it, there was an enormous fight because people couldn't get along. They couldn't decide what the country was going to be like. And finally, old Ben Franklin got up and he made a speech in which he said, you know, if a sparrow can't fall to the ground without God noticing, how can we raise up a great nation without God's help? And he moved that we have a prayer that opens every constitutional convention, which we did. Everybody then came together, they got along, they put together a constitution which endures to this day. This federal judge in San Francisco would have ruled the Constitutional Convention unconstitutional. I don't think taking down the cross at Mount Soledad is something that the founding fathers would have wanted. It's an activist liberal judge who is very predictable, and I think she's going to be overturned.
So she said, though, that the cross doesn't need to be taken down; it needs to be remodeled. How do you remodel a cross?
Well, I think her idea may be to downsize. So maybe she'll put together a metric that says if you have a cross, especially when she goes after all the crosses at Arlington Cemetery, she's going to have a metric that says if they're so big they have to be removed, but we'll allow them to be fairly small. How do you remodel a cross? That's a great question. It's just a cross, but it means so much to the people whose names are on those plaques that surround that memorial at Mount Soledad.
So many people in this community. I mean, basically, it was the original challenge was from a guy named Paulson, who was an atheist, and he ended up dying. I mean, he didn't even see it through. He died before all these lawsuits even came to fruition. And there's really just a small group of people who apparently are offended by this.
Yeah, and you know, for the people that say we're atheists and we don't want to have crosses, fine. There's a lot of hills around here with nothing on them. Those can be their hills.
All right, so now this thing headed to the Supreme Court, obviously. This is a federal panel, and so it will be appealed, I presume, by the federal government. I would
think that this one goes up and gets reversed fairly quickly, like a lot of liberal rulings by the Ninth Circuit.
Well, it's a big day today in Washington, D.C., and you mentioned that you're glad you're not a part of it today.
Well, actually, you know, it was a lot of fun being there. It was
Yeah.
a great privilege serving the folks in the community. But it's kind of nice to see see some new blood in there. And this is a lot. There are a lot of challenges. Our challenge right now is to create some jobs in this country, and we have moved a big piece of the manufacturing base of America to China. So when people go into places like Walmart and other places and shop and spend thousands of dollars, there's no recalls for workers to come back to the factories in the United States. There's recalls for workers to come back to the factories in places like Beijing. We've got to retrieve a part of our manufacturing base that's gone overseas because there's lots of high-paying jobs that used to be here. Used to be in California and the rest of the nation. They're now offshore. Yeah. And so bringing a lot of those jobs back and creating manufacturing jobs, which are high-paying jobs, that can pay mortgages, that can be used for car payments and sending your kids to college. We need to bring that industrial base back to this country. That's the real challenge for this Congress.
All righty. Congressman Duncan Hunter, thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. Happy New Year.
My advice is worth what you paid for it.
Well,